Hello, today I want to look at green glazed earthenware pottery, mainly because a lot of people think that green glazed pottery is always medieval. By medieval I mean 1500 or before in date, but actually this is far from the case. So today I want to show you a few reliable ways to tell if your pottery is medieval or post-medieval in date. The pottery I'm going to show you is all from London and the southeast of England. In general terms, the points that I will make will cover the whole country, but there may be local exceptions. To demonstrate, I'm going to concentrate on two industries because they are common finds, both mudlarking in London and field walking in the southeast, and with a little practice are easily identifiable. Other fabrics are available. From these industries, I'm going to concentrate on white firing clay. There are, of course, a whole range of red firing clays produced in green glaze from the early medieval period right through to the 19th and early 20th century, and of course post-industrial bone china and porcelain with green glaze, but those I'm going to leave for another session. The industries I want to look at today are Surrey Whiteware and Borderware industries. Surrey Whiteware was produced from 1240 to 1400 at Kingston and at Bankside, and from around 1350 to 1500 at Cheam and at various places along the Surrey-Hampshire borders. The latter is known as Coarse Borderware. These were large industries, providing at times up to 2/3 of the pottery used in London and capable of fulfilling royal orders for several thousand pots at a time. The Borderware industry uses the same clay and possibly the same families are involved in its production. Again, it is centred around the Surrey-Hampshire borders, notably at Farnborough and Cove, and the peak of production for the white firing clay was around 1550 to 1700, so a post-medieval industry. Again, a large quantity of pottery was sold to London and around the southeast, and they also supplied the early American colonies. Okay, let's look at some clay. I've got a box here, green glazed pottery from the Thames and from Hampshire. Sadly we won't have time to look at all of it. I've got to save some items for another time. Okay, here are two pieces of clay. One is Surrey Whiteware, and it comes either from Kingston, Cheam or Bankside, and it dates from around 1240 to 1400. The other is Borderware, which dates from around 1550 to 1700. So they might be separated by more than 400 years. If you have body shards like these, or small pieces, which are not diagnostic, in other words, you can't tell from the form whether it's a very medieval form or a very post-medieval form, and as you can see the glaze looks very similar, then how can you decide which are medieval and which are post-medieval? Well, the easiest way is to look at the clay itself, and more importantly, what has been added to the clay or what has been left in the clay. Potters add temper to clay to open it up and to strengthen it for the firing process. The easiest and surest way to divide medieval from post-medieval is to look at this temper. In the medieval industries, much more obvious temper was used, and natural inclusions were left in the clay. So if we look at a piece, you can see quite obvious white, black, clear, sometimes rose-coloured, quartzy coloured inclusions in the clay, up to several millimetres across. Hopefully you can see close up in a square centimetre, quite an obvious number of inclusions there. In the post-medieval borderware industries, much more care was taken with preparing the clay, so it's a much cleaner clay. If we look, you can actually, just in that whole piece, I think there is one little black inclusion there. And that's pretty much the same on most borderware pieces. Might be one, and if you look at the broken edge, there might be one or two visible inclusions. So in layman's terms, medieval pottery is full of bits. It does vary from industry to industry and from century to century. Basically, the earlier Surrey Whiteware clay has less inclusions than the later Coarse Borderware clay. So these are from the earlier period, sort of 1240 to 1400, and there are less inclusions, but still a lot more than the post-medieval borderware. If I show you, this one is a rather nice Kingston face jug, a bit battered. So this would date from 1240 to 1400, and if you look at it, hopefully you can see, if you count a square centimetre, 4, 5, 6 little inclusions. So quite clean clay, but obviously with inclusions. Whereas you look at this Coarse Borderware cooking pot rim, which is 1350 to around 1500, you can see it's like someone's dusted it with pepper. It is chock full of inclusions. And then, as I mentioned before, the borderware, post-medieval, very clean clay with very rare inclusions. I mentioned earlier that there might be diagnostic features that could give us a hint to date, and so let's have a look at some of these. Medieval handle, jug handle, slashing and stabbing. The stabbing goes all the way through. This is partly a decorative feature and partly to help the thicker pieces of clay to fire properly in the kiln, so that the water moisture can escape easily without blowing up the pots. Here's a nice, very large jug or cistern handle, which I found in the Thames, and you can see again slashing and stabbing, and the inside a very rough connection to join the handle to the pot, body of the pot, and obviously a fabric full of little pieces. So we're talking medieval, we're talking Coarse Borderware, 1350 to around 1500 for that piece. Another diagnostic feature of medieval pottery in London and the southeast is thumbing around the base. Individual thumbing, and on this piece it's rather nice, you can see the fingernails of the potter where he reached in and squidged each bit. Not to be confused with thumbing around the rim, which is done in an overlapping way. This, of course, red clay, which is post-medieval redware, and this would date to the 16th or 17th centuries, as opposed to this piece, which again is Coarse Borderware, 1350 to around 1500. There are other features, diagnostic features, in terms of decoration. As I said, a face pot, very nice find, not very common obviously, would be definitely medieval. Other diagnostic features of medieval pottery in terms of decoration would be roller stamping on that piece, and that piece, highly decorated wares. So these pieces, normally the highly decorated style would be the Surrey Whiteware industries from the earlier medieval period, which would be 1240 to 1400, as opposed to the later ones, which were rarely decorated. In terms of borderware, Most of it was very functional, domestic pottery, so very rarely decorated, but where there are decoration, it's more likely to be done around the rim of chargers and plates in sgraffito, where it's just scratched running decoration of different styles, and occasionally some stamps, small stamps, into the rim of the pot there. To look at the glaze itself, generally on medieval pots the glaze is used more sparingly, just on certain areas like a bib in front of a jug, and you can see it's just rather hit and miss. But obviously on post-medieval vessels you might still get that where glaze has dripped from other vessels above them in the kiln. So that's not a surefire way of discerning medieval from post-medieval. The way that vessels were glazed differ slightly from some medieval pots to post-medieval. In the medieval period, some of the glaze apparently was applied in powder form, and this can leave very characteristic pits on the surface of the pot. I don't know if you can see that pitting. Perhaps it's easier to... There, probably those two are the most obvious. They're little pits where the powder has dropped onto the pot and has formed that little depression during the glazing process in firing. And you don't see that in post-medieval pottery, so that might be an indicator that you've got a medieval piece of pottery. Another frequently misused term that I see online a lot and hear a lot is Tudor green, which is bandied about for a lot of green glazed wares. Tudor green is not the name of an industry or a location. It's not produced in one place. It's more of a style, and it can run through the whole medieval and early post-medieval time frame. Basically, it's a coverall term for very thin-walled, high-quality pieces, often connected with drinking. So maybe lobed cups and cups with ribs around them for drinking individuals to drink from. Here's one small piece that definitely would be called Tudor green. Dates to about 1500 to 1550, and it's part of a lobed cup, and you can see there's the junction between two lobes. But it's very fine clay and very thin walled with that green glaze on it. So if we compare that with the average Borderware shard, you can see the difference in thickness there. So anything this thick is not Tudor green. It has to be thin like that, just to give you a pointer. So anyway, I hope you found that helpful. There are some very, very good mudlarking sites on Facebook, and there is a link down there somewhere to where you can join those groups. And if you find pottery, you can post that and people will be very happy to identify it for you. One piece per photo and a nice clear photo if possible would be helpful. Thank you. Just to end, there was some alternative titles I had for this short video. And I'll run a few of those past you now. I did consider calling it green glazed, white firing pottery from the southeast of England in the post-medieval and medieval periods 1240 to 1700, a question of attribution. But I thought that was a bit of a mouthful, and I'd probably need it to be published by Oxbow Books for £74.95, so I decided against that. So how about the Pottery Doctor will see you now? Maybe a bit too flippant, perhaps. So in the end, I went for the title that you can see at the beginning of the video. Thank you, bye.